Can a single unknown surgeon save an entire hospital from collapse in just one night? At 2:58 a.m., the chief of surgery gripped the rail above operating room 2 and watched a temporary surgeon close her fifth case like she was tying a clean knot on a field dressing. If you want to see how true excellence transforms a crisis, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never back down. 3 hours, 5 perfect surgeries, no complications, no hesitation. He leaned toward the glass and whispered the only question that still made sense. Who are you? If you've ever been underestimated at work, judged by the uniform you wear or told to stay in your lane while the pressure keeps stacking, you already know that tight familiar burn in your chest. Rivergate Medical in Tulsa was drowning in trauma, short-staffed, running on cold coffee and stubborn pride. Stay to the end, and you'll see what battlefield medicine looks like when it collides with civilian rules. Like the video and comment where you're watching from. He had asked the question like a prayer he did not believe in, and the glass had offered no answer. Downstairs, the hospital kept breathing fluorescent and relentless, as if it had not just witnessed something that bent the rules of time. Hours earlier, Rivergate Medical Center looked like any other trauma hospital. Near midnight, the lobby lights were dimmed to save electricity. The vending machines clicked and hummed. A security guard leaned on the front desk, eyes heavy, watching a muted television roll through weather radar and late-night ads. The air smelled of antiseptic microwaved soup and the faint metallic bite of elevator grease. On the third floor outside Surgical Services Chief of Surgery, Dr. Marcus Vance stood at the schedule board with a marker in his hand, jaw tight enough to ache. A column of names ran down the page, each one a case that had been postponed, bumped, or crammed into the night shift. He was not looking at patients. He was looking at minutes. He was looking at the math of an impossible night. Charge nurse Chloe Brooks approached with a clipboard pressed to her chest. She moved fast, efficient, the kind of person who could read an entire hallway with one glance. She stopped just outside his orbit. "We have the agency surgeon," she said. Vance did not turn. "About time." Chloe hesitated. "She got in 10 minutes ago. She's in the prep room." Vance capped the marker, then finally looked at Chloe. His eyes were tired, but not soft. "What did they send?" Chloe kept her tone neutral. "Board certified, trauma credentialed, cleared by HR." Vance let out a thin breath. "That is what the email says." "That is not what I asked." Chloe's gaze held. "Her name is Dr. Paige Sterling." Vance blinked once as if the name carried no weight at all. "Sterling. Fine. Put her on the simple stuff. Appendices. Gallbladder. Anything that won't sue us if it goes sideways." Chloe shifted her clipboard. "We're backed up, doctor. I can read the board. What I mean is we're running with gaps. Ortho is stretched. Peds is on one room. Anesthesia is thin. If we get hit, we're going to feel it." Vance turned and started walking, expecting Chloe to follow. "We've been getting hit for 3 weeks. I'm not letting a temp turn my O into a courtroom." They moved through the corridor where the walls were lined with framed photos of past chiefs and donors. Men with calm smiles. Women with polished hair. Faces that did not show blood or sweat or the night you made a decision you could never take back. The prep room door was half open. Vance pushed it the rest of the way with 2 fingers. Dr. Jared Hunt and Dr. Nicole Cross were already inside, leaning against the counter like they owned the place. Hunt was tall and sleek, sleeves rolled with careless confidence. Cross sat on the edge of a stool, scrolling her phone, her badge swinging lightly with each movement. Near the sink, a woman stood quietly with her hair pulled back, hands under running water. She wore navy scrubs that had seen too many washes. The fabric hung plain and unremarkable the way hospital uniforms did when there was nothing designer about them. Her shoes looked older than they should. Vance's eyes flicked over her, then to the duffel bag by the wall. It was scuffed, stitched at one corner as if it had been dragged across concrete more than once. He cleared his throat. "Dr. Sterling." She shut off the water with her wrist and turned. Her face was composed, neither eager nor defensive. Early 30s maybe. Clear eyes, no jewelry, no perfume, nothing that would catch on a glove or distract a hand. "Yes, doctor." Vance did not offer his hand. "You're the replacement." "I am." Hunt smiled without warmth. "We were expecting someone with a little more polish." "No offense." Paige's expression stayed level. None taken. Cross's eyes lifted from her phone, slow and measuring. How long are you here tonight? Paige said. Maybe longer, depending on your needs. Vance watched her carefully as she reached for the scrub brush. The movements were economical. No fumbling. No guastidmotion. The kind of habit that came from repetition under pressure. Where did you train? Vance asked. Paige began scrubbing methodical. A few places. Hunt chuckled. That sounds like code for bouncing around. Paige's eyes did not leave her hands. It means I've worked stepped closer, lowering his voice as if quiet could turn into control. Listen, we're not a training ground. You stay within your privileges. You do what you're assigned. You ask if you're unsure. You do not freelance. Yes, doctor. Cross leaned forward, interested. Now, what's your specialty, Sterling? Trauma. Hunt raised his brows. Everyone's trauma these days. Paige rinsed and reached for the towel. Is there a problem? Hunt held up his palms. No problem. Just hope you can handle a simple laparoscopic appendectomy. We've got people waiting and we'd like to go home before sunrise. Vance glanced at the schedule again, then back at Paige. You will start in 03 routine cases. If we need you, we'll pull you. Paige finished drying her hands. Understood. A pager chirped somewhere outside the room. Chloe's voice came through the intercom in the hall, calling for a circulating nurse. The tone was tight, clipped the sound of a system trying to stay ahead of its own collapse. Vance turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something. Credentials are verified. Chloe answered from the doorway. HR says yes. Privileges granted for general surgery and trauma coverage. Vance nodded, but his eyes stayed on Paige. HR doesn't stand in the room when things go wrong. I do. Paige met his gaze evenly. Then we want the same thing. Vance did not smile. We want patients alive. We want clean outcomes. We want no headlines. Paige's reply was quiet. I want patients alive. Hunt snorted. Look at that. Shared values. Vance walked out. Chloe waited until he passed, then stepped inside, her voice lowering. Just so you know, Chloe said to Paige. He's not always like that. Paige picked up her cap and tied it on. He's responsible. I get it. Chloe studied her for a beat. You've been in trauma a while. Paige's eyes flicked to the hallway where the sound of wheels and distant voices carried. Long enough. Chloe nodded once and gestured toward the corridor. Come on, I'll show you where we stash supplies. If you need anything, you call me, not Hunt. He'll talk you into something dumb, and then act shocked when it's dumb. Hunt put a hand over his heart. Chloe, that hurts. Chloe did not look back. Good. They walked together through the surgical wing. The floors gleamed under the lights. But the shine could not hide the scuffs from gurney wheels and the dull stains that never truly vanished. A cluster of residents hovered near a computer station. Clicking through charts, their shoulders hunched like soldiers over a map. An anesthesiologist rolled a cart past them. Head down, moving with the tired efficiency of a person who lived in a world of alarms. Of Chloe pointed as they went. Or 1 and 2 are for the bigger cases, or 3 gets overflow, or 4 is down for maintenance. Sterile supply is at the end. Blood bank is 1 floor down. If you need units fast, you call me, and you call them because the phone tree here is a disaster. Paige listened, eyes scanning, absorbing. She did not interrupt. She did not ask where the coffee was. She asked, where's trauma bay access from here? Chloe glanced at her. You can cut through that stairwell. Why? Paige's voice was even. So I don't get lost if we need to move. Chloe gave a short nod. Fair. They reached the supply room. Chloe opened the door with her badge and let Paige step inside. Shelves lined with packs, clamps, sutures, drapes, everything labeled, everything stacked in the way a hospital tried to pretend it was prepared. Chloe watched Paige's eyes move. You're cataloging. Paige reached for a suture packet, checked the label, set it back. Exactly. I like knowing what I have. Chloe leaned against the door frame. Most temps don't care. Paige glanced at Chloe's badge. How long have you been here? 8 years. Chloe's tone held the fatigue of someone who had watched the same problems repeat. Long enough to see good surgeons leave for better money and bad surgeons stay, because they know how to play nice with admin. Paige's face stayed neutral, but her eyes sharpened slightly. You've had staffing issues. Chloe let out a humorless breath. That's the polite way to say it. We're short-staffed. Our time gets cut. And every week, someone in a suit asks why we can't do more with less. Paige looked back at the shelves, then at Chloe. And tonight, Chloe said, we're trying to keep the boat from taking water. A call bell chimed in the distance. Chloe straightened. We have a gallbladder in pre-op. Uncomplicated. Vance wants you on it. Paige nodded. Who's anesthesia? Dr. Raymond Jaw. He's good. He's seen everything. Don't let his quiet fool you. Paige picked up a pair of gloves and tucked them into her pocket. Where do you need me first? Chloe stared for a second, then blinked as if she had not expected the question. Or 3. I'll walk you. As they headed back, Paige's duffel sat for a moment in the hallway unattended. Chloe paused, noticed, then looked back at Paige. Do you want that brought to a locker? Paige came back, lifted it easily. The bag looked heavy. Not hospital heavy, but the weight of gear. I'll keep it close. Chloe did not ask what was inside. In 03, the patient was already being prepped. A middle-aged man, anxious, talking too much to cover fear. A nurse adjusted his blanket. You're going to be okay, the nurse said. The man nodded like he believed her. He looked at Paige when she stepped in and his eyes flickered to her scrubs. Then away again like he was trying not to judge. Dr. Cho stood at the head of the bed checking lines. He looked up. His face was calm, tired eyes behind clear lenses. Dr. Sterling, Chloe said. This is Dr. Cho. Cho gave a small nod. Nice to meet you. Paige returned the nod. Likewise. Chloe leaned into Paige. Uncomplicated gallbladder. Surgeon of record is you. Vance wants speed but clean. Paige's gaze went to the monitors, then to the patient's abdomen, then to the tray. She spoke to the circulating nurse voice. Steady. Time out. When you're ready. The timeout was routine, but Paige listened as if each word mattered. Name, date of birth, procedure, allergies, correct site. When it was done, she waited an extra second, then said, thank you. It was small, almost nothing, but the tone made the nurse's shoulders loosen. Hunt wandered in hands and pockets, peeking at the setup. So, Sterling, what's your lap time? You fast or do you like to take scenic routes? Paige did not look up. I like the patient to wake up. Hunt laughed, but there was a slight edge to it. Goo. Vance appeared in the doorway, eyes moving over the room. We're not here to trade lines. Get it done. He left as quickly as he came, like a commander, checking the perimeter. The surgery began, and for the first 10 minutes, everything looked ordinary. Paige moved with confidence. Nothing flashy. Cho watched her hands and the screen. The gallbladder came into view. Adhesions were minimal. The case flowed. Then a nurse's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it and her face tightened. Chloe's voice crackled over the intercom. Trauma team to Bay 1. Incoming. Stand by. Cho looked up. We just started. Paige's eyes stayed on the field. Finish safely. If this intense hospital drama is gripping you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video right now so you never miss an episode. Chloe's voice came again louder. Trauma team to Bay 1 now. Multi-vehicle collision reported. 2 units. ETA 5. The room shifted. A circulating nurse glanced at the door. The scrub tech paused, waiting. Paige's voice stayed low and controlled. Keep going. Don't rush. We close, then we move. The gallbladder came free cleanly. The patient's vitals held stable. Paige clipped, caught her eyes, checked for bleeding, then irrigated. She closed with practice speed, not hurried, just efficient. Cho watched the timer. His expression did not change, but his eyes followed every move. As they finished, the trauma pager screamed from the wall, a sound that made the hair rise. Chloe stepped into the doorway, face pale under the fluorescent lights. It's bad, Chloe said. We're getting 3 critical motorcycle versus semi plus 2 from the same wreck. It is packed. It never ends. Paige stripped her gloves, already moving. Where do you want me? Chloe hesitated, then said what Vance had ordered. Trauma 2. He wants you on the least critical. Paige nodded once. Show me. They moved fast but not frantic. The hallway had changed in minutes. More staff running. A resident pushing a cart with rapid infuser supplies. A respiratory therapist swinging an oxygen tank around a corner. Near the elevator, Vance stood with a phone pressed to his ear, barking short orders. When he saw Paige, his eyes narrowed slightly, as if measuring whether she would slow him down. Sterling, he said sharply, lowering the phone. You take trauma 2. You do not touch trauma 1 unless I say so. Paige did not argue. Understood. Hunt hurried past them with sharp, both suddenly all business. Their earlier jokes evaporated under the weight of incoming sirens. As Paige and Chloe reached the trauma bays, the noise grew. Alarms, footsteps, a gurney rolling hard over a seam in the floor. Someone calling for blood. Someone calling for suction. Trauma 1 was already prepping. Vance stepped inside. Shoulders squared, the chief again, command in his posture. Trauma 2 was quieter, waiting like an empty theater before the curtain rose. Paige walked in and scanned the room. She checked the airway cart first, hands moving without hesitation. She opened a drawer and confirmed the laryngoscope. She checked the suction line. She verified the crash cart seal. She looked at the wall clock. Then she looked at the bed and adjusted the light. A trauma nurse young watched her and frowned. You want help with something? Paige's eyes did not leave the equipment. Tell me where you keep your tourniquets. The nurse blinked. Tourniquets are in trauma 1. Paige's gaze flicked toward the door, then back. Get to here. The nurse hesitated, then went. Chloe stepped in behind Paige. Most surgeons don't ask for tourniquets. Paige's reply was quiet. Most surgeons haven't needed them. Chloe opened her mouth to ask, then shut it as the first siren screamed closer, loud enough to be felt in the chest. Through the glass partition, Paige saw trauma 1 flood with bodies. Vance's voice carried sharp and fast. Orders snapped like commands on a range. The ambulance bay doors slammed open. Cold night air swept in with the smell of exhaust and wet asphalt. A paramedic's shout cut through everything. Motorcycle versus semi. Massive abdominal trauma. Pressure dropping. We're losing him. The gurney wheels squealed as they raced down the corridor. Paige stepped closer to the glass, not to watch, but to orient herself, eyes tracking the motion of the team. The position of carts, the path of blood banker runners. Another gurney rolled in behind the first, a woman groaning, face, ash, and leg twisted at an angle that made the stomach flip. Chloe looked toward trauma 2. That's yours? Paige nodded once, then moved to the bed. Hands ready, voice calm. What's her name? Paige asked. The paramedic answered, breathless. Linda Harris, 48, hit from the side. Compound fractures femur and tibia. Possible internal injuries. Pressure is trending down. Paige took the report without flinching. She placed 2 fingers on Linda's wrist, feeling the pulse. She watched Linda's eyes, the way they searched the room. The way fear tried to climb into panic. Linda's voice was thin. Am I dying? Paige leaned in just enough for Linda to hear her. Not if we can help it. Stay with me. Linda's eyes locked on hers. I can't feel my foot. Paige turned to the nurse. Oxygen, warm fluids, 2 large bore lines, type and cross. Chloe stepped forward. I'll call blood bank. Paige's gaze went to the monitor again, then back to Linda. Pain control, but keep her breathing. We need imaging now. Fast. The nurse nodded, already moving. Paige's voice stayed steady. A low current through the full trauma panel. Cross-match 6 units. Orthopedics on standby. Chloe froze for half a second, surprised by the number. Paige did not look up. Yes. Chloe saw something in Paige's face. Then not panic, not bravado. Calculation. Chloe turned and ran. Through the glass, the paramedic who had brought the motorcycle victim stopped mid-stride. He stared at Paige as if he had walked into the wrong building. He blinked hard, then leaned toward the glass, eyes narrowing, searching her face. No, he mouthed. It can't be. Paige did not notice, or she chose not to. Her attention stayed on the patient in front of her, on the falling blood pressure, on the cold sweat gathering at the hairline. The room tightened around the moment, the way it always did when a line was crossed and a patient began slipping. A monitor beeped faster. Paige lifted her eyes to the nurse. Tell me when the O is ready. The nurse swallowed. They're turning it over. Paige nodded once, then looked to the door as footsteps pounded closer, and the hospital shifted into full emergency rhythm. The O did not feel ready. It felt borrowed. or 3 was still warm from the gallbladder case. The smell of cautery hanging in the air like burnt hair. The turnover team moved fast, stripping drapes, wiping surfaces, snapping fresh packs open with gloved hands. Sterile blue fluttered like flags in a tight wind. Chloe Brooks slid into the room with the kind of speed that came from repetition and fear. "Blood bank is moving," she said. "They want confirmation on 6 units." Paige did not look away from the gurney being rolled in. Linda Harris was shivering hard now. Her skin going gray at the edges, lips turning a shade that didn't belong on a living person. Her left leg was wrapped in a temporary splint, but the bones had already written their story through the skin. The foot looked wrong, too pale, toes stiff. "Confirm it," Paige said. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Raymond Cho, was already at the head of the table, snapping into his work as if the calm in his face had been welded there. He glanced at Paige once. "You just came off a case," he said. Paige's eyes moved over the monitor. The 4 lines, the blood pressure reading that kept sliding. "So did you?" Cho's mouth twitched, not a smile. Something like agreement. The circulating nurse called out, "Time out." Paige listened as if every word mattered because in her world they did. Name, procedure, allergies, antibiotics, consent. When the nurse finished, Paige said, "Begin." The first incision was clean. "No flerisc, no hesitation." She opened with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she would find and where. The moment the tissue parted, the room changed. The quiet sharpened. Every pair of eyes leaned in. Paige's voice stayed low. "Suction." A tech moved. Not because someone told him to, but because the tone carried certainty. Blood pulled where it did not belong. The kind of bleed that hid behind false stability, until the patient fell off a cliff. Cho watched the pressure. "She's dropping." "I know," Paige said. She extended a hand without looking. "Clamp." The instrument met her palm like it had been waiting. Paige placed it with precision, paused, then shifted slightly. Chloe leaned closer, keeping her voice down. "General surgery is on standby. Ortho is coming." Paige's attention stayed inside the body. "Tell them to wait outside. Keep the hallway clear." Chloe blinked. "You don't want them scrub?" Paige's answer was soft. "Not yet." She traced the bleeding back, not chasing it like a dog after a scent, but reading it like a map. Her hands did not waste motion. She did not fight the anatomy. She moved through it. Cho felt the tone in the room, and found himself adjusting his own rhythm to match. 2 units are on the way. "Hang them," Paige said. "Warm." The nurse started asking questions, and stopped mid-sentence. Paige's eyes flicked up just once. "Talk less," Paige said, not unkindly. "Listen more." The nurse flushed, then nodded, and the room fell into a different kind of teamwork. Paige found the vessel. Not with luck, with certainty. She controlled it quickly, and then, instead of calling for someone else, she began repairing it. Cho's head lifted. He couldn't help it. "That's a vascular repair," he said, voice almost disbelieving. "We don't have vascular in-house tonight." Paige did not look up. "You do now." Chloe felt her own stomach tighten. She had seen good surgeons. She had seen fast surgeons. This was different. This was fast, without noise, precise, without ego. It made everyone else feel like they were moving through water. Ortho arrived at the door half-scrubbed, eyes wide. "You want us in?" Paige kept working. "Give me 4 minutes." The ortho attending hesitated, then glanced at Chloe for permission. Chloe didn't know when she had started taking cues from the temp, but she had. She nodded at them to wait. For minutes later, Paige said, "Now." Ortho stepped in and Paige shifted seamlessly, handing off the bone work with clear instructions like she had rehearsed the choreography with them for weeks. "Reduce here. Align. Pin. Don't pull. Slide." The attending obeyed. Not because he was weak. Because she was right. Cho watched the clock. He watched the vitals stabilize. He watched the bleeding stop and stay stopped. He watched the temperature climb back into the safe zone. It felt like watching a storm pass without leaving damage. Paige took the leg back for a moment, checked perfusion, then nodded. "Pulses back," she said. The ortho attending stared at the foot as if it had returned from the dead. "How did you even catch that so early?" Paige's answer came out flat. "You look." She closed with speed that did not look hurried. Suture after suture fell into place like a pattern. When she finished, she stripped her gloves, tossed them, and stepped back. Cho checked the time again, almost angry at it. 53 minutes. The circulating nurse exhaled hard like she had been holding her breath the entire case. Transport to recovery. Paige didn't celebrate. She didn't even watch the gurney leave. She was already reaching for the chart. Chloe's eyes stayed on her. You did that like you've done it 1,000 times. Paige flipped a page. Enough. The O door opened and Dr. Miles Vance walked in expecting to see chaos. A half-finished incision. A temp surgeon with sweat on her brow and excuses on her tongue. Instead, he saw a room that looked almost bored. A clean field. A stable patient being wheeled out. Staff moving with calm efficiency. Vance's eyes narrowed. Where is she going? Paco said. Vance turned on Paige. That case was assigned as least critical. Paige met his gaze. She was bleeding internally. She would have crashed in the bay. Vance looked around the room as if searching for proof of some hidden disaster. His eyes landed on the completed repair, the tidy closure, the absence of the frantic mess he expected. How long? He said, and he hated that his voice sounded. Cho answered for her. 53 minutes. Vance stared at Cho as if Cho had betrayed him. Then back to Paige. That's not possible. Paige's voice stayed even. It happened. Vance's face tightened. The irritation he had worn all night shifted into something else. Something that looked like threat, but was closer to fear. You're done, he said as if he could order the world back into the shape he understood. Paige glanced down the hall at the sound of another pager screaming. No. Vance stepped closer, lowering his voice. Sterling. That was not a community hospital repair. Paige tilted her head a fraction. You told me you want patients alive. Vance's jaw clenched. He had said those words like policy. She had taken them as doctrine. Chloe stood between them without meaning to. Dr. Just called up another case. Vance didn't blink. What kind? Chloe swallowed. Cardiac. Hunt appeared at the doorway, scrubbing in as he spoke. Let me guess. You want me to fix it because you don't trust the temp? Vance ignored him, eyes locked on Paige. You're not touching a cardiac. Paige's gaze didn't waver. Who is available? Vance opened his mouth to answer, and found nothing clean enough to say. The truth was ugly. The truth was that his best people were tied up. The truth was that the hospital was running on the edge of failure. Paige stepped past him. Not rude. Simply moving through space the way she moved through tissue. I can take it. Hunt let out a short laugh. You're not serious. Paige looked at Hunt, calm as stone. Do you want the patient to wait while you argue? Hunt's smile fell. Cho spoke quietly, watching Vance more than Paige. I'm already here. I can cover anesthesia. Vance's eyes flashed. Pride rose first, then the weight of the board in his head, the math of minutes, the knowledge that people died while leaders protected their egos. He exhaled once sharp or two. Now. Paige did not thank him. She simply turned toward O2. As she walked, the EMT who had brought in the motorcycle victim stood near the hallway, hands braced on his knees, breathing hard. He looked up and froze. His eyes followed her and his face shifted recognition, trying to claw its way through disbelief. He took a step, then stopped as if the ground had turned uncertain. Chloe caught his stare. You okay? The EMT's mouth opened. That's her. Chloe frowned. Who? The EMT swallowed. I don't know her name, but I've seen her hands. I've seen that calm. It wasn't here. Chloe started to speak, then had to move as a gurney rushed past wheels, clattering nurses, calling for a clear path. The hospital was a river now, and everything in it was moving. In O2 the lights were brighter, colder. The room felt smaller because the stakes were larger. The patient was already on the table when Paige entered. Middle-aged, sweaty eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from chest pain that didn't stop. A nurse held his hand and murmured reassurance, but the man's breath was shallow, broken. Cho checked the monitors, his voice controlled. Blood pressure is unstable. We're not getting good perfusion. Paige's gaze went to the imaging on the screen. Her eyes moved quickly, absorbing. She did not ask for a second opinion. Prep, she said. I want full access. I want suction ready and I want 2 units hanging. A resident hesitated. Dr. Sterling, Dr. Vance usually. Paige looked at him, not harsh. He is not the one in the room with the patient. The resident flinched, then nodded and moved. Vance stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. He looked like a man waiting to say, "I told you so." But there was tension in his shoulders that didn't match smugness. It matched dread. Paige began. Her movements were spare. She did not chatter. She did not announce every step like a performance. She worked. Cho watched her hands and felt something twist inside him. He had been in medicine 15 years. He knew the difference between confidence and recklessness. This was neither. This was confidence forged under pressure. He leaned in. "Where did you learn this technique?" Paige kept her eyes on the field. Work. Cho's voice dropped. "Military." Paige did not answer. The room held its breath as she controlled the problem. The bleeding stopped. The pressure began to climb. The monitors shifted from panic to stability. It felt like watching a needle pulled back from a red zone. Vance's arms loosened. His face did not. But the posture shifted the way a man's body changed when he realized the disaster he expected had not arrived. Cho glanced at the clock. He didn't want to. He did anyway. 38 minutes, he murmured. The circulating nurse looked at him, eyes wide. "That's impossible." Cho's voice was tight. And yet Paige closed without pause, then stripped her gloves, the snap of latex loud in the silence. "Pack you," she said. Vance stepped into her path as she moved toward the sink. "Sterling." Paige stopped. Not because he demanded, because stopping cost less than stepping around him. Vance's voice was lower now, stripped of earlier disdain. "Where did you train?" Paige washed her hands, slow and exact. "A few places." Vance leaned in. "That cardiac repair. I have only seen that technique used by combat surgical teams." Paige's eyes stayed on the water running over her fingers. "Then you've seen it." Vance's face hardened, caught between anger and something like awe. "Why are you here?" Paige shut off the water with her wrist. "Because your hospital needed coverage." Vance's nostrils flared. He wasn't used to answers that did not beg for his approval. Chloe appeared breathless. "We have pediatric trauma coming up. 7-year-old internal bleeding." Vance's head snapped toward her. "Where's Dr. Linton?" Chloe swallowed. "Still in trauma 1 with the abdominal case from the motorcycle." Vance's eyes flicked to Paige before he could stop himself. "No." Paige was already moving. "Show me." Vance stepped after her. "Sterling, pediatric trauma is not." Paige looked back at him, and there was no arrogance in her face, only a quiet truth. "He cannot wait." They moved toward O1 where the pediatric team was gathering tense as wire. Pediatric surgery was a different kind of pressure. Adults died and the staff mourned. Children died and the staff broke. A small boy lay on the bed, skin pale under harsh light hair, damp with sweat. His chest rose and fell too quickly. A nurse had taped a cartoon sticker to the edge of the blanket like a charm against fear. The pediatric resident spoke fast, voice shaking slightly. 7 years old, 50 pounds, suspected splenic laceration. Evidence of active bleeding, vitals unstable. Paige stepped to the screen, eyes scanning the imaging. Her face did not change, but the air around her did. It steadied. She looked at the team one by one. "Talk to me." The resident blinked. "I just not the summary," Paige said. "The details." The resident swallowed and began again slower. "History, mechanism, symptoms, labs, imaging, everything." Paige listened without interrupting. Then she nodded once. "We keep him warm," she said. "We keep him perfusing. We control bleeding. We do not rush the wrong thing." A scrub nurse, older with tired eyes, looked at Paige carefully. "Have you done kids before?" Paige met her gaze. "Yes." The nurse held her stare, searching for the tremor of uncertainty. Finding none, she nodded and began opening sterile packs. Cho arrived again, rubbing his forehead once, then dropping back into his role. "I'll cover anesthesia." Vance stood at the door, watching his face drawn. He wanted to stop this. He wanted to be responsible. But responsibility was not the same as control. Responsibility sometimes meant letting the best hands work, even when you hated the way it made you feel. The surgery began. Paige's hands changed, not in speed, but in softness. Her grip was lighter. Her movements were more delicate, as if the boy's body could hear her. The room quieted. A suction tube whispered, Monitors beeped. The ventilator hissed in steady rhythm. Paige found the bleed and controlled it with the kind of precision that made the resident's eyes sting. She didn't take extra tissue. She didn't tear what didn't need tearing. She did exactly what the body asked for and nothing more. Cho watched the boy's blood pressure stabilize and felt a strange emotion hit him sharp and unexpected. Relief, yes, but also anger at the world for making a child need this level of violence to stay alive. Vitals are stabilizing, he said, and his voice carried wonder. If this thrilling operation shows you the power of dedication, take a second to hit like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Despite his discipline, the resident whispered almost to herself, "I've never seen anything like this." Paige did not look up. She kept working. 42 minutes later she closed. "No complications expected," she said. "He should recover fully." The room stayed silent for a beat, the way people went silent in church after something sacred. Then the boy was wheeled out and the staff exhaled like they had been underwater. Vance stepped away from the door as if he needed space between himself and what he had just witnessed. Chloe followed him into the hallway. He spoke without looking at her. "Get me her file." Chloe's eyes widened. "HR already verified." "Get it anyway," Vance said. Chloe hesitated, then nodded. Dr. Vance turned and Chloe saw his face clearly for the first time tonight. Not irritation, not superiority, something like displacement, as if the floor under his career had shifted. "How," he said, and the words sounded raw in his throat. Chloe answered honestly, "I don't know." A gurney rolled past a nurse jogging beside it. Rivergate didn't pause for miracles or doubts. It kept calling for hands. In the break room, the EMT from earlier paced like a man trying to outrun a thought. He stopped when he saw Chloe, then pointed down the hall. "That surgeon," he said. "Sterling? That's not her name." Chloe's stomach tightened. "You know her?" The EMT shook his head hard. "Not personally. I saw her once. Walter Reed. I was transferring a wounded vet, and there was a team in a room that looked like a war zone, even though we were stateside. She watched everyone." Chloe stared at him. "Walter Reed is in Maryland. I know where it is." The EMT snapped, then caught himself breathless. "They called her Wraith." Chloe felt the word land like a weight. "Why?" "Because she showed up when everyone else was done." "Hoping," the EMT said, voice dropping. "Because she could do the impossible and make it look like routine." Chloe looked back down the hall where Paige had disappeared into the flow of the hospital again. No entourage, no spotlight, just another set of hands moving where they were needed. Vance's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, stared at the screen, then looked toward Chloe. "Do we have anything else?" he asked, and his voice was controlled, but his eyes were sharp. Chloe swallowed. Tram 4 called up a complicated gallbladder. Severe adhesions from prior surgery. Vance's jaw tightened and wared. Chloe nodded. She already offered. Vance turned his head as if listening to the hospital itself. The alarms, the footsteps, the constant hungry demand for decisions. He looked back at Chloe. "Where is she now?" Chloe glanced toward the corridor heading to 03. Vance started walking and Chloe followed, feeling the strange shift in gravity around them. It wasn't just that the Temp had handled 3 major cases. It was the way the hospital had begun to orbit her calm. Outside 03. Paige stood at the sink again, scrubbing, posture relaxed. A tech handed her a gown. She took it without looking, eyes on her hands, as if everything depended on the ritual. Vance stopped a few feet away. For a moment he did not speak. He simply watched. Paige glanced up. Doctor's voice came out low. "Your credentials, HR says they're in order." "They are," Paige said. Vance held her gaze. "An EMT says he's seen you before." Paige's expression did not change. "EMTs see a lot." Vance stepped closer, lowering his voice so the staff could not hear. "Walter read." For the first time, Paige paused. The water kept running. The fluorescent lights kept buzzing, but something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of distance like a door in a bunker closing. She shut off the water slowly. "The patient is ready." Vance looked at the schedule board on the wall, then back at her. His throat worked once as if he had to swallow whatever he had planned to say. "Proceed," he said. Paige nodded and turned into the and Chloe watched Vance's face as he stared after her. The chief of surgery looked like a man trying to fit a battlefield into a hospital. The adhesions announced themselves the moment Paige entered the abdomen. What should have been a straightforward gallbladder case turned into a dense web of scar tissue, pale bands pulling anatomy out of its usual logic. The monitor showed a landscape that looked familiar only in the broadest sense, like a city map after an earthquake. The scrub tech shifted uncomfortably. That's worse than the scan. Chloe stood near the door, listening to the room with the instincts of someone who could hear trouble before it spoke. The circulating nurse glanced toward the hall, as if expecting Dr. Vance to burst in and reclaim the case out of sheer reflex. Paige did not react to the tension. She adjusted the camera angle, then steadied the instruments with both hands, eyes narrowing in concentration. Her voice stayed low. "Light up the lateral edge," she said. The tech complied and the field brightened. A resident assigned to observe swallowed hard. "If we tear the duct, we won't," Paige said. It was not bravado. It was an instruction to the room. A line drawn in the air. She began the dissection the way a bomb tech might separate two wires that should never have been twisted together millimeter by millimeter, respecting every structure that could kill the patient if offended. The scar tissue resisted clinging and dragging, but her hands did not fight it. She waited for the right tension, the right angle, the right moment to advance. Cho watched from the head of the bed, fingers on the controls, breathing measured. He had learned long ago that anesthesia was its own war. It just happened quietly. He glanced toward the clock, and then forced himself not to. Looking at time made people chase it. Paige did not chase anything. The gallbladder finally emerged, stubborn and inflamed, tethered by a history the patient could not undo. Paige clipped and cauterized with a discipline that kept the field clean. When the duct came into view, she paused, confirmed, and then proceeded with a calm that settled the entire team. The resident leaned closer, eyes wide. "How are you not shaking?" Paige's eyes stayed on the monitor. "Because shaking doesn't help." A nurse let out a soft breath that sounded like a laugh and a sob at the same time. Near the end, the bleed came. It was not catastrophic, but it was sudden, a sharp bloom of red that would have turned a less steady room into a storm. The resident stiffened. The circulating nurse reached for extra sponges. Paige said suction, and the word landed like a weight. The field cleared. Her hand moved, clamped, controlled. The bleed stopped as if it had been switched off. No raised voices, no panic, no drama. 55 minutes after incision, Paige closed. The scrub tech stared at the closure as if it belonged in a museum. That was Paige stripped her gloves. Transport. Chloe watched the patient roll out, vitals stable, and felt something uncomfortably close to hope. Outside or three. Dr. Vance waited. He had been standing there for most of the case, pretending he was simply monitoring throughput, pretending he was not listening to every update through the partially open door. His arms were folded, his posture rigid as if holding his body in place would hold his authority in place, too. When Paige stepped out, he blocked her path with a controlled precision that mirrored hers. He kept his voice low, but there was a tremor under it now. "That took under an hour," he said. "It's done," Paige replied. Vance's eyes flashed. "You're treating my hospital like a field lab." Paige looked at him steadily. "Your patients are alive." Vance's jaw tightened. He wanted to say that survival was not the only metric. He wanted to say there were protocols, committees, liability, optics. But the words tasted weak against the reality of the last few hours. Chloe stepped between them, not physically, but with her tone. "Dr. Chief of Staff Evelyn Vance is here." Vance's head snapped toward her. She came in. Chloe nodded. "She's in your office." Vance stared at the hallway as if it had betrayed him. "Now." Chloe's voice stayed neutral, but her eyes told the truth. "Now." Paige did not move toward the office. She moved toward the board again, scanning for what was next. Her calm made Vance's agitation look louder than it was. He pointed a finger, stopping her without touching. "Sterling, you wait." Paige's eyes lifted. "People are still coming through your doors." "Wait," Vance repeated, and the word came out sharper than he intended. Chloe watched Paige's face for a crack. There was none. Paige simply nodded once, then stood by the sink, hands resting lightly on the counter as if waiting was just another tool. Vance turned and walked fast down the corridor, Chloe following. The walls blurred under fluorescent light. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and stress. Near the elevator, the EMT Lucas Merritt stood talking to a group of nurses. Voice urgent. "I'm telling you it's her," Lucas said. "The Wraith, Walter Reed. She was on the combat support rotation." A nurse shook her head. "That's a story." Lucas's eyes were wide. "It's not a story. I watched her walk into a room where a man was flatlining, and within minutes he was back like somebody rewound the tape." Chloe slowed, catching Vance's sleeve. Dr. Vance glanced at Lucas, then kept moving. "Not now." Chloe's voice dropped. "It is now." Vance didn't answer. He pushed into his office. Dr. Evelyn Vance stood by the window, coat off now, sleeves rolled, hair pinned tight. She looked like someone who had learned to sleep in fragments and still wake ready to command. A folder lay open on Vance's desk, but she wasn't reading it. She was waiting. Vance shut the door and turned. "You came fast." Evelyn's eyes stayed on him. "You called at 2:20 in the morning and said you had a situation that would get us sued." "I did not come for the coffee." Vance took a breath, trying to shape chaos into something presentable. "We have a temp surgeon." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "We have many." "This one," Vance said, and his voice tightened, "has done 4 major cases in under 3 hours. Times that do not make sense. Results that look like a marketing department invented them." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "Outcomes? No complications so far," Vance said. "Patient stable." Evelyn turned slightly toward Chloe. "And who observed?" Chloe held her clipboard tighter. "I did. Dr. Cho did. Ortho observed the first trauma repair. Pediatric team observed the 3rd case." Evelyn's attention returned to Vance. "And what is the problem?" "If patients are stable and her credentials are verified," Vance's mouth twitched. He hated that question because it forced him to say the truth out loud. "The problem," he said, "is that an EMT recognized her. Claims she is ex-military combat surgical Walter Reed. And if that is true, then she is either someone with an extraordinary background working under a temp agency name, or she is someone lying about being someone else. Either way, we need to know who she is." Evelyn's expression did not soften. "We need to know anyway. Insurance is not a mood. Privileges are not a rumor." Vance's hands tightened into fists at his sides. "HR says she is cleared." Evelyn stepped closer to his desk and tapped the open folder. "HR clears paper. We clear risk. A surgeon performing outside normal scope without proper documentation is a lawsuit in motion. If she is practicing techniques that require specific privileges or specialized credentialing, our policy demands verification." Vance looked at Chloe. "Where is she?" "In the surgical corridor," Chloe said, waiting. Evelyn nodded once. "Bring her here." Chloe hesitated. "She's still working. There's another case pending." Evelyn's eyes stayed cold. Patients do not benefit from a hospital losing its license. Vance opened the door and walked out. Evelyn right behind him. In the corridor, Paige stood exactly where she had been. Hands resting on the counter, posture loose. The hospital around her was loud, but she carried a pocket of stillness as if she had brought it with her, and could not be separated from it. Vance approached Evelyn at his shoulder. "Dr. Sterling." Paige looked up. "Dr. Chief of Staff." Evelyn's eyes studied her face without apology. "Dr. Sterling, we need to talk." Paige's gaze was steady. "I have another patient waiting." Evelyn's voice stayed formal. "That is why we are talking now. You have performed multiple complex surgeries tonight at speeds that require explanation. Our liability policy requires credential verification for any temporary surgeon performing high-acuity cases." Paige nodded once as if acknowledging a known rule. "My credentials are in order." Evelyn did not blink. "Then you will have no problem confirming them." Paige's eyes drifted briefly toward the board, the flow of the hospital pulling at her attention. "Paper can wait. Blood cannot." Vance's jaw clenched. "Sterling." Paige looked at him. "Which case is waiting?" Chloe answered quietly. "Complicated appendectomy. Patient deteriorating in trauma 5. Paige shifted her weight. "Then we move." Evelyn stepped slightly into her path, not blocking but asserting. 5 minutes. That is what you can give us." Paige's gaze stayed level. Those 5 minutes belonged to the patient. The hallway felt suddenly tight, as if the air had thickened. Nurses moved past, glancing at the cluster, sensing tension but not knowing its shape. Cho passed with an anesthesia cart and slowed when he saw Evelyn. Chief Cho said, nodding. Evelyn nodded back, then kept her focus on Paige. Your training, your prior appointments, your privileges. We need confirmation. Paige's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly, like a muscle remembering something unpleasant. I am cleared to operate. Evelyn's voice sharpened. Cleared is not the same as verified. Vance stepped closer to Paige, lowering his voice. An EMT says he recognized you from Walter Reed. Paige's eyes flickered. Not fear. A flicker of distance, the way a person's gaze might change when hearing a song they thought they'd buried. Chloe saw it. Cho saw it too. Paige's voice stayed calm, but the temperature of it dropped. People say a lot of things when they're tired. Vance's throat worked. Is it true? Paige held his gaze for a long beat, long enough that the hallway noise seemed to soften around them. Then she said, there are soldiers alive today because of the work I did in places you will never see. Evelyn's expression shifted a fraction. Not sympathy. Recognition of a kind of seriousness she could not litigate away. Paige continued, voice quiet. When you operate in a tent and the ground shakes, you learn to be fast. You learn to be clean. You learn that perfection is not something you aim for. It is what you do because there is no room for less. Vance's face tightened. So you are military. Paige's eyes stayed steady. I was attached to a unit. Evelyn's tone remained controlled. That still requires documentation. We need your full file. Paige's jaw set. My file exists. Then provide it. Evelyn said. Chloe glanced down the hall. A nurse was approaching quickly, face drawn. She stopped a few feet away, breathless. Dr. Martinez, she began, then caught herself, confused, eyes flicking to Paige. Dr. Sterling. Trauma 5 is ready. His vitals are dropping. Paige's head turned toward the nurse immediately. We go now. Evelyn's voice cut in. 5 minutes. Paige looked back at Evelyn, and for the first time there was an edge in her calm. Chief of Staff, you can call my agency and verify every line of my resume while I stop a patient from dying. You can do both. I cannot. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Then she looked at Vance. A silent exchange. Policy versus blood. Risk versus life. Vance's pride fought in his throat. Then he said go. Evelyn's gaze snapped back. Miles. Vance's voice was low. We can verify while she operates. Chloe, get HR on the phone. Call the agency. Pull her credentials. Pull everything. Chloe nodded, already dialing. Paige did not wait. She moved down the corridor toward O2 with the nurse step steady, not hurried. As if panic could not be allowed into her body. Cho fell in beside them, anesthesia bag in hand. Appendix, Cho said, glancing at the chart as they walked. Complicated, the nurse added. They said unusual anatomy on scan. Paige's eyes scanned the sheet quickly. We treat what we see. Cho watched her profile the set of her jaw. Walter Reed, he said quietly, not accusing, just testing the word. Paige did not answer. They entered O2 and the room shifted again the way it did when the patient became the center of gravity. The man on the table looked older than his chart, skin clammy, breathing shallow. His eyes darted toward Paige, then away. Am I going to die? He whispered. Paige stepped close enough for him to hear her. Not if you keep breathing with me. Focus on my voice. His gaze latched onto hers like a lifeline. Cho began induction, voice smooth, practiced. The room settled into sterile rhythm. Evelyn and Vance stood outside the window watching. Evelyn's arms folded, not defensive, but braced. Vance's eyes never left Paige. Chloe returned to them. Phone pressed to her ear. Agency is verifying now. HR is pulling her file. Walter Reed is not on her submitted employment history. Evelyn's eyes tightened. That is a problem. Vance swallowed, or it's an omission. Evelyn's voice was sharp. Omissions become lies in court. Inside the page opened. The first few minutes looked routine, but the anatomy did not follow the expected script. Tissue planes were distorted. Adhesions tugged structures out of position like someone had rearranged the map. Cho watched the monitors. Pressure is unstable. Paige's hand stayed steady. I see it. Vance leaned closer to the glass. He saw what she saw. He saw how quickly an appendix could become something else. He saw how one wrong cut could turn a manageable problem into disaster. Paige adjusted her approach, not forcing the procedure into the shape she wanted. She let the anatomy dictate. The technique was controlled, almost minimalist, as if she had learned to operate with limited instruments and no margin. Evelyn watched her hands and felt an uncomfortable question rising behind her training. How did a temp surgeon in discount scrubs move like that? Chloe's phone buzzed with another call. She answered quickly, then her face changed. "It's the blood bank," she said. "They said she ordered 6 units earlier and used 2. They want to know if they should stage more." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the O for an appendectomy. Chloe swallowed. "She's not treating it like one." Vance's voice was low. "Neither should we." Inside or 2. Paige found the complication and contained it before it turned into chaos. Her hands were quick but not hurried. She worked like someone who had learned that speed was a byproduct of clarity. Cho felt himself breathing in time with her movements. He hated that he trusted her this quickly. He trusted her anyway. Evelyn watched and tried to anchor herself in policy. Policy did not stop bleeding. Policy just explained it afterward. Minutes passed. The patient's vitals steadied. The field cleared. The complication became manageable, then solved. Vance's shoulders loosened slightly, as if his body had been holding a weight he refused to name. When Paige closed the room inside, looked almost calm again, the way a battlefield looked calm after the last shot. And before anyone counted bodies, Paige stripped her gloves and stepped back. Transport. Cho glanced at the clock and shook his head slightly, not believing it. He did not say the number out loud, saying it would make it real. Paige walked out into the corridor, pulling off her cap. Evelyn and Vance were waiting for her. And now there were more faces, senior surgeons who had been called in when the rumors started moving faster than any official page. Dr. Nina Cross stood near the wall, eyes wide, her earlier smugness gone. Dr. Hunt hovered a few steps behind, lips pressed tight, his confidence bruised into silence. Evelyn stepped forward. "Dr. Sterling, your file does not include Walter Reed." Paige's gaze stayed steady. "It wouldn't." Evelyn's voice tightened. "Why?" Paige looked at Evelyn for a moment as if choosing what to give. "Because I did not include everything I've done." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "That is not an answer that makes our lawyers feel better." Paige's expression remained controlled. "I am not here for your lawyers." Vance's voice came out quiet. "Then why are you here?" Paige held his gaze. "Because your patients need surgery." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We still need verification." "Who are you, doctor?" The question hung in the corridor heavier now because it was no longer just Vance whispering at glass. It was administration demanding a name, a history, something the system could label and control. Paige's eyes moved across the faces watching her. Surgeons, nurses, techs, people who had spent their lives learning to keep hands steady while hearts raced. She exhaled once slow. "My name is Paige Sterling," she said. "Trauma surgeon." Evelyn's voice stayed clipped. "That is your name, not your history." Paige's gaze drifted briefly, not to the floor, but to a point beyond the hospital walls, beyond Tulsa, beyond the clean lights and steady power. "I was attached to an expeditionary combat support unit," she said quietly. "For 4 years." A silence spread outward like ripples. Hunt's eyes widened. Cross's mouth opened then closed. Chloe felt her throat tighten. Vance swallowed. "Afghanistan." Paige nodded once. Evelyn's expression shifted, the rigidity momentarily cracking under the weight of reality. "Why are you working agency temp assignments?" Paige looked back at her, and for a beat the calm looked tired. "Because civilian medicine has its own war," she said. "It just calls it something else." Evelyn's eyes sharpened again. "Policy returning like armor. You will provide your full documentation by morning." Paige's gaze did not flinch. "I will provide what you need. When the immediate work is done." Evelyn's voice rose a fraction. "You do not get to decide when compliance matters." Paige's reply was quiet, but it landed hard. "I decide when a patient dies." The corridor went still. Even the people who disliked Paige felt the truth of it. Vance stepped slightly between them, voice controlled. "Evelyn, her paperwork can be handled. Her hands cannot be replaced tonight." Evelyn stared at him, anger flickering behind her eyes. Then she looked past him at Paige. Dr. Sterling, Evelyn said, and her voice returned to formal steadiness. You will meet with me after the next lull. Paige nodded once as if acknowledging a checkpoint. If there is a lull? Chloe's pager chirped again. She glanced at it then looked up. Ear has 2 more admissions. Not surgical yet. Observation and scans. Vance's shoulders dropped slightly. Not relief, just a fraction of space. Paige turned toward the sink again, washing blood from her hands with the same methodical precision she used in the O. The ritual looked almost like prayer. Just tut ni babi quit. Then he spoke softly to Paige, not to the room. They really called you Wraith. Paige's eyes stayed on the water. They called me what they needed. Cho nodded slowly as if he understood more than he wanted to. Evelyn watched Paige from a few feet away. Eyes narrowed in a calculation that had nothing to do with scalpels. She was thinking about risk, yes, but she was also thinking about what it meant to have someone like this inside a system that rarely made room for people who did not play its games. Vance stared down the corridor where the trauma bays waited, where new alarms would eventually rise, where another patient would come in with their life spilling into strangers' hands. He had spent years believing he understood control. Tonight had shown him something else. Control was not a title. It was not a schedule board. It was not a policy binder. Control lived in the person who could keep order inside chaos and make everyone else better just by the way they moved. Paige finished washing and reached for a towel. She dried her hands slowly, then looked at Chloe. Check on Linda Harris, Paige said. The vascular repair should hold, but watch distal pulses every hour. Chloe blinked, then nodded. I will. Paige looked at Cho and the boy. Cho's voice softened. Stable, warming up. He's going to make it. Paige nodded once, and for the first time since she walked into Rivergate. The edge in her posture loosened just slightly. Evelyn cleared her throat. Dr. Sterling. Paige turned. Evelyn's voice was quieter now. If you are who you imply, then you understand chain of command. Paige's gaze held. I understand. Responsibility. Evelyn studied her for a long moment. Then nodded once almost reluctantly. We will speak again. Paige did not answer. She simply turned toward the bored eyes, scanning, looking for the next problem before it found her. Vance watched her for a beat longer than necessary, then glanced at Chloe. Get me everything HR can pull. Every license, every privilege, every prior hospital. Chloe nodded, already working on it. Vance's voice dropped and find out why someone like her is here. Chloe looked down the corridor where Paige stood alone in her calm, surrounded by a hospital that now felt like it was holding its breath around her. I don't think she wants to be found, Chloe said quietly. Vance did not respond. He only watched Paige's hands move as she adjusted her gloves again, preparing without drama, as if another case was just another case. And in the trauma bays downstairs, monitors continued their steady beeping, indifferent to rumors, indifferent to policies, indifferent to the strange fact that Rivergate had just been forced to make room for a kind of surgeon it did not know how to measure. Paige stood at the schedule board long enough for the ink to stop looking like words and start looking like weight. Names, procedures, room assignments, the thin margin between manageable and disaster. The hallway noise kept rolling past her, a constant river of footsteps and alarms, but her attention stayed on the same 2 lines. Trauma 5 appendectomy unstable. She reached for a pen and marked the case with a simple circle, the kind of small gesture that meant a decision had already been made. Chloe watched her do it, and felt the strange certainty that the night would keep bending around Paige until it was over. Vance's voice came from behind her. You've already done enough. Paige did not turn. Enough is not a number. Evelyn stepped closer, her presence all sharp edges and policy. We are not authorizing another major case until we have verification in writing. Donna saw Vance's shoulders stiffen. He had lived his whole career balancing the O against the administration. Tonight, the scale had tipped hard, and he didn't like how it felt to be the one caught in the middle. Cho appeared at the edge of the group, chart in hand. Eyes tired but alert. The patient in trauma 5 is worsening. Pressure is dropping. Pain is escalating. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Then stabilize him in the bay. Cho's tone stayed respectful, but it carried something firmer underneath. We are past the point where stabilization buys time. It only delays the bleed. Evelyn looked at Vance. Miles. Vance's eyes flicked to the corridor where Gurney kept moving. He had spent years believing he could control outcomes by controlling process. Tonight, process had become a luxury. Paige finally turned, meeting Evelyn's gaze. "Authorize it," Paige said. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You are a temporary surgeon operating under privileges granted by our hospital. You do not give directives to my office." Paige's voice stayed even. "Then call it what you need. A request, a recommendation, a warning. He will not survive waiting." Evelyn held her stare, and for a moment Chloe wondered if the entire night would break here. Not in a no, but in a hallway under fluorescent lights while a patient's clock ran down one floor below. Vance exhaled, then spoke quietly. "Evelyn, if we stop her now and he dies, we own it." Evelyn's expression did not soften, but something shifted in her eyes. She had built her career on rules that kept hospitals open and lawsuits at bay. The rules were real. The patient was realer. She looked at Chloe. "Get me the agency on the phone again. Get me her licensing numbers. Get me anything that confirms what she says." Chloe nodded and started moving. Evelyn turned back to Paige. "You will meet with me in the morning. You will provide a full employment history." Paige nodded once. "In the morning." Evelyn's voice sharpened. "Not if you disappear." Paige's gaze stayed steady. "I'm not here to disappear." Vance stepped back, giving her space. "Or two is ready." Paige was already walking, hands rising to tie her cap again. Posture calm as if the argument had never happened. Cho fell in beside her. "You okay?" Cho asked quietly, not because he thought she would break, but because he needed to know what kind of storm lived behind her stillness. Paige did not look at him. "Yes. Yo soy Lao. Walter Reed. That EMT." He wasn't guessing. Paige's eyes flicked toward him briefly. "Don't make it a story." Cho nodded, but his gaze stayed on her hands as she pushed through the doors. He had watched hundreds of surgeons operate. Only a few made the room feel safer just by stepping into it. Or two was colder than the hallway. The kind of sterile cold that made skin tighten. The patient lay under bright lights, face slick with sweat. A man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, but pain had aged him. His eyes were half open, unfocused, fighting the pull of shock. The nurse leaned close to Paige as she approached. "His name is Mark Pritchard. CT suggests an inflamed appendix, but the anatomy looks odd. They think they're scarring from prior surgery." Paige glanced at the monitor, then at the patient's color. "Pressure," Cho answered without looking up. "Low and trending down." Paige stepped to the bed, leaning close enough for Mark to see her. Her voice dropped into something steady, almost intimate. "Mark, you're in the right place. I need you to listen to me." His eyes found hers desperate. "Am I dying?" Paige held his gaze. "Not if we move now. You'll feel sleepy. That's normal. Keep breathing." His lips trembled. "Okay." Cho began induction, voice smooth and practiced. The ventilator hissed. The monitors kept their rhythm too fast, too loud. Outside the window, the observation gallery had started to fill. Vance stood at the front, hands on the rail. Evelyn stood a step behind him, arms folded, eyes fixed. Hunt and Cross hovered near the back, drawn in despite themselves. A couple of senior surgeons Vance had called in quietly were there, two faces tight, not sure whether they were witnessing genius or liability. Chloe slipped into the gallery with her phone pressed to her ear. She whispered into it. "Eyes never leaving the room below." "Yes, I need the credentiating officer." "No, not now." Paige made the first incision, and the room below went silent in the way rooms went silent when the scalpel touched skin, and nothing else mattered. For the first few minutes, it looked like an appendectomy. Familiar landmarks, standard approach, the camera angle steady, instruments moving in clean lines. Then the anatomy shifted. Adhesions pulled the tissue in ways it shouldn't. Planes were distorted. The appendix was not where it should have been. A structure that looked harmless at first glance revealed itself as a threat the moment the light hit it at the right angle. Cho's voice tightened. "Pressure is dropping more." Paige did not pause. 2 units. The circulating nurse moved. The blood was hung. The room stayed quiet. From the gallery, Evelyn leaned forward. She could not see the detail, but she could see the change in pace. Not faster, more precise, more deliberate. like a person stepping into a minefield after realizing the map was wrong. Paige's voice carried through the calm but absolute suction. Gentle traction, do not pull. A resident at the table hesitated, then adjusted, hands shaking slightly. Paige reached over and steadied the resident's wrist with 2 fingers barely touching. The shaking stopped. Vance watched that small act and felt something unpleasant in his chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was the realization that she was doing in seconds what he had spent years trying to teach, not technique, control. The complication declared itself in a sudden bloom of blood. A smaller surgeon would have chased it. A louder surgeon would have barked. A proud surgeon would have refused to change course. Paige changed course immediately. She widened her view, cleared the field, controlled the bleed with a clamp placed exactly where it needed to be. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. She held the pause for half a breath, verifying, then moved again. Cho watched the pressure stabilize by degrees. "Coming up," he said, and the surprise in his voice was impossible to hide. Paige didn't answer. She was focused on the source, not the symptom. Her hands moved with a precision that made the instruments look lighter than they were. She found the problem isolated. It fixed it without turning the O into a crisis. From the gallery, Hunt's face had gone pale. He was a good surgeon, and that was the problem. Good surgeons recognized what could go wrong. He recognized every place this could have turned into a catastrophe. Cross's lips parted slightly. Her earlier smugness burned away by something closer to fear. Not fear of Paige. Fear of being measured against her. Evelyn watched without blinking. She had spent her life in the administrative layer of medicine. The layer that kept doors open and lights on. But she was not blind to what excellence looked like. Excellence was not a slogan. It was this impossibly calm competence under pressure. The clock ticked. 3 hours since Paige first set foot in Rivergate's wing. And here she was again, moving like the same person who had walked in with scuffed shoes and no ego. Doing work that did not match the label of temporary. Paige began closing the final sutures placed with quick, clean certainty. The monitor tone steadied. The field was clean. The patient's skin color looked less like ash. Cho checked the time, and for a moment his face tightened as if he wanted to argue with the number. Paige stripped her gloves and stepped back. Transport. The gurney rolled out. Theo breathed again. In the gallery, Vance's hands tightened on the rail. The question rose in him with a force he couldn't stop. It wasn't curiosity. It was a kind of fracture. The world he understood could not hold what he had just witnessed. He leaned toward the glass and whispered almost involuntarily, "Who are you?" Below, Paige washed her hands methodical. As if she had not just turned a complicated case into a controlled outcome. She stepped into the corridor, pulling off her cap. The hallway lights made her look more ordinary than she had any right to look. No cape, no swagger, just a surgeon with tired eyes and blood under her nails. Vance and Evelyn were there waiting. Chloe stood off to the side, phone in hand, face tight with the strain of bureaucracy racing to keep up. Evelyn spoke first, voice clipped but not cruel. "That was not a routine appendectomy. What you just did exceeds the scope of a standard agency assignment." Paige's gaze stayed steady. It was the surgery the patient needed. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We have to answer to more than patients. We answer to boards, to insurers, to the state." Paige's voice did not change. "Then answer to them." "I answered to him." Vance stepped closer, his voice lower than Evelyn's. "Sterling, I need to know where you learned that." Paige looked at him. For a moment, the calm on her face softened into something older, more tired. Then it hardened again, not into anger, but into resolve. "I learned it where time mattered," she said. Vance's eyes narrowed. "Tell me." Chloe's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then up at Evelyn. "Credentiating officer is on the line." They confirmed her license, board certification, prior hospital privileges. They can't confirm the military piece from the agency file. Evelyn's eyes tightened. "Because it isn't there." Paige exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't put it there." Evelyn's voice sharpened. "Why?" Paige's gaze moved past Evelyn down the corridor toward the trauma bays and the constant churn of the hospital. "Because people look at military medicine like it's a headline. Like it's a brand. I didn't want a brand. I wanted work." Vance's face tightened. That doesn't answer why you're here under a temp agency. Paige met his gaze. You want a clean story? I don't have one. Evelyn stepped closer. You will provide your full history. Now Paige's eyes lifted to Evelyn, and for the first time there was a hint of heat in her voice. Not disrespect. A boundary. Chief of Staff, I've given you 5 patients who will go home instead of going to the morgue. If you need my history for your paperwork, you'll have it. But you don't get to demand it like I owe you the pieces of my life you can file. The corridor went quiet in that particular way. Hospitals went quiet when something real cut through the routine. Vance held Evelyn's gaze for a beat, then looked back to Paige. His voice dropped. Tell me directly. Who are you? Paige's eyes moved across the faces around her. Surgeons who had judged her scrubs. Nurses who had followed her without thinking. Administrators who saw risk before they saw blood. She took one slow breath. My name is Dr. Paige Sterling. She said, I'm a trauma surgeon. I trained at Hawthorne University Hospital. After my fellowship, I spent 4 years attached to the 18th Expeditionary Combat Support Unit. Evelyn's face tightened, where Paige's voice stayed quiet. Afghanistan. Vance's throat worked. How many cases? Paige stared at a point just past him as if counting in a place far away. Over 800 surgeries under combat conditions. Hunt's breath caught behind them. Cross went still, eyes wide. Paige continued, voice controlled, but the words carried weight now, not drama. Field amputations, emergency thoracotomies, blast injuries, gunshot wounds, kids caught in the wrong place, soldiers who didn't have time to be flown anywhere better. We operated with generators that cut out with dirt in the air with mortars in the distance. Sometimes close enough you felt it in your teeth. Evelyn's face held. Policy did not help her here. There was no form for this. Vance's voice came out. Why leave? Paige's gaze returned to him. Because coming home didn't feel like coming home. Evelyn recovered, first voice returning to its sharp edge. And yet you are here in a civilian hospital taking temp assignments. Paige's mouth tightened, but she answered. Because civilian medicine is full of noise, she said. Politics, meetings, branding. People arguing about who gets credit while patients wait. I can't do that part anymore. I don't want to. Vance's eyes narrowed. So you run. Paige's gaze did not flinch. I work. Evelyn stepped in. Hospitals require structure. Paige nodded once. So do combat units. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. Then you understand chain of command. Paige's voice stayed quiet. I understand mission. Vance looked at Evelyn. Then back to Paige. Caught between two worlds. He had always thought administration was a necessary enemy. Tonight he realized it was a necessary system. Paige was a force that did not fit neatly into systems. The question became whether Rivergate could bend without breaking. Evelyn's voice lowered, and for the first time it carried something like respect. You said soldiers are alive because of your work. Paige's eyes did not change, but something in the air around her did, like the corridor had gotten colder. I received commendations, she said, for surgical excellence. For outcomes. For saving people the triage tags said were unsalvageable. Chloe felt her throat tighten. Vance's jaw clenched. How many? Vance asked, and his voice sounded like he didn't want the answer. Paige's gaze held steady. 137. Silence spread heavy and complete. Evelyn looked away first, then back. Those numbers need verification. Paige nodded. You can verify them. Vance's voice dropped. Why hide it? Paige's eyes flickered, the smallest crack in her composure. Because when people hear it, they stop seeing the patient and start seeing me. I don't want to be seen. I want the work done. The hallway remained still, as if the hospital itself had paused to listen. Then a pager chirped. Another call. The world pushing back in. Chloe checked her screen. No surgical emergencies at the moment. Observation and imaging. Vance exhaled slow. It wasn't relief. It was space. Evelyn looked at Paige, and her expression shifted into something more careful. We will meet in my office at first light. Paige nodded. First light. Vance stepped closer, voice quiet, stripped of the disdain from earlier. Paige, you did extraordinary work tonight. Paige's eyes stayed on his, calm but guarded. Your team kept up. Vance swallowed. Not everyone could. Paige's gaze moved briefly to Hunt and Cross. Hunt looked away first. Cross didn't. She held the look, and in it, Chloe saw something change, not into admiration, but into humility. Evelyn spoke again, voice controlled. We will need to decide what your role is if you remain here beyond this shift. Paige didn't answer immediately. She looked down the corridor toward the trauma bays, toward the place where the next emergency would arrive without caring who was credentialed and who was admired. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. I'll be where I'm needed. Vance watched her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if acknowledging a truth he couldn't override. Paige turned back toward the sink, washing her hands again, blood turning the water faintly pink before it cleared. The ritual was the same. The person behind it was not. Evelyn and Vance stepped away. Evelyn already reaching for her phone. Vance already staring at the schedule board like it had become a different language. Chloe lingered near Paige, lowering her voice. You didn't have to tell them all that. Paige dried her hands carefully. Yes, I did. Chloe's brow furrowed. Why? Paige glanced at her, and there was no softness in the answer, only honesty. Because they weren't going to stop asking. Chloe nodded slowly, then looked down the hall. Do you regret it? Paige's gaze followed hers. No. Cho approached chart tucked under his arm. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady. Mark is stable. Pacquiao says he's waking well. Paige nodded once, and the tightness in her shoulders eased by a fraction. Vance called Chloe from farther down the corridor. Chloe, with me? Chloe stepped away, but before she left, she looked back at Paige. If you need anything, Paige's reply was quiet. Keep the team steady. Chloe nodded and followed Vance. Paige remained by the sink for a moment longer, hands resting lightly on the counter, eyes unfocused as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. Then she picked up her cap, checked the board again, and walked toward the break room with the same calm she had carried into every room tonight. As if calm was not a feeling, but a discipline. Dawn came in thin and gray, the kind of Oklahoma sunrise that looked reluctant to touch anything. The windows along the third-floor corridor brightened slowly, turning the hospital's reflective surfaces into pale mirrors. Rivergate Medical did not celebrate mornings. It just survived nights and kept moving. In the break room, the coffee tasted burnt before it even cooled. The fluorescent lights were too white. A vending machine hummed like a generator that never shut off. Paige sat at a small table with a stack of charts and a pen. Shoulders relaxed, posture straight as if exhaustion were something she could deny by refusing to lean. She wrote with clean, controlled strokes, post-operative notes, orders, follow-ups, pulse checks, imaging recommendations. Each line tight and direct as if she were handing instructions to someone who might have to read them under fire. A nurse slipped in quietly, saw her, and froze. Word had moved through the hospital faster than any official email. People on night shift talked in fragments and glances in the language of disbelief. The temp surgeon. The impossible times. The kid who stabilized in under an hour. The chief watching like he didn't recognize his own O. The nurse cleared her throat. Dr. Sterling. Paige looked up. Yes. The nurse stepped closer, unsure where to put her hands. Linda Harris and Pacquiao. Distal pulses are strong. Pain controlled. Ortho says the alignment looks good. Paige nodded. Good. Keep checking every hour for the first 6. If anything changes, call. The nurse's eyes stayed on Paige's face, searching for whatever people thought genius looked like. Okay. She didn't leave right away. They're saying you were military. Paige's gaze returned to the chart. People say things. The nurse lingered another second, then slipped out, moving like someone who didn't want to disturb a sacred object. A few minutes later, Dr. Raymond Cho walked in carrying his own cup of coffee, and the weary calm of a man who had spent the night keeping blood pressure from becoming a headline. He closed the door behind him, and leaned against it exhaling. You're still writing, he said. Paige did not look up. The night doesn't end when the incision closes. Cho watched her pen move. Mark Pritchard is awake. Pacquiao says he asked if he can go home today. Paige made a note without changing expression. Tell him no. Cho let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. You just saved his life. And your reward is telling him no. Paige glanced up briefly. That's medicine. Cho took a sip of coffee and winced. This is punishment. Paige's mouth tightened slightly. Not quite a smile. You'll live. Cho's eyes held hers longer than necessary. I've worked with surgeons for 15 years. I've seen good. I've seen brilliant. I've never seen anything like tonight. Paige returned to the chart. Combat medicine teaches efficiency. Chose sharpened. So it's true. Paige's pen paused for the first time. She looked at the paper as if deciding whether to write the next word. Then she continued steady again. True enough. Cho nodded slowly, accepting what he could. He wasn't administration. He wasn't trying to trap her with questions. He just wanted to understand the shape of the person who had changed the air in his O. The break room door opened again and Chloe Brooks stepped in. She looked like she had aged 5 years since midnight, but her eyes were still sharp. Behind her, Dr. Miles Vance entered carrying the stiffness of a man who hadn't sat down in hours, and the focus of a man who knew something in his hospital had shifted. He stopped when he saw Paige at the table writing like nothing had happened. Chloe closed the door softly. The three of them stood in a triangle of quiet. Vance's voice came out low. All 5 are stable. Paige nodded without surprise. Good. Vance's jaw clenched and Chloe could see he was fighting the urge to add conditions and caveats to that statement as if stability had to come with a disclaimer. Instead, he said the pediatric case. The boy. He's warming up. No signs of ongoing bleed. Paige's pen moved again. Okay. Vance stepped closer, eyes on the charts. You're documenting like you're staying. Paige looked up. I'm finishing my work. Chloe shifted her weight. Chief of Staff Evelyn is waiting in her office. She wants the meeting now. Paige's gaze went back to the notes. I'll go after I finish these orders. Vance's eyes flicked to Chloe, then back to Paige. She's not going to like waiting. Paige's voice stayed calm. She's welcome to sit. Vance stared at her for a beat. Then something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. It wasn't surrender. It was recognition. Paige wasn't being difficult for sport. She was placing priorities in a way that didn't fit the hospital's usual hierarchy. Chloe cleared her throat. There's something else. Paige looked at her. Chloe's voice lowered. Nurses want to talk to you. They watched you. They're asking questions about techniques about how you kept the room calm. One of the senior nurses said she learned more tonight than at most conferences. Paige's eyes stayed steady. I'll answer what I can. Vance nodded once, then said the words he had been holding in his mouth like a stone. After tonight, we're going to want you to stay. Paige didn't respond immediately. She returned to the chart, wrote one more line, capped the pen, and finally looked at him. Why? She asked. Vance's face tightened. Because we need surgeons like you. Paige's gaze held his. You mean you need outcomes like mine? Chloe's eyes flicked between them, bracing for the conversation to turn into a fight. Vance surprised her by not denying it. Yes. The honesty landed with weight. Vance had built his reputation on control and excellence, but he wasn't stupid. He could see the difference between good and elite. Tonight had shown him a level he could not reach alone. Paige nodded once as if acknowledging a fact, not a compliment. Before anyone could speak again, Paige's phone buzzed on the table. The sound was soft, but in the quiet room, it felt loud. Paige glanced down at the screen. Her expression changed. Not much, just enough that Chloe's stomach tightened. Vance noticed. Everything all right? Paige stared at the message for a long beat, then set the phone face down. Cho's eyes narrowed. Walter Reed. Paige didn't answer, but the silence confirmed it more than words could. Vance stepped closer, voice careful. They want you back. Paige's gaze lifted slowly. They think they do. Donna felt the air in the break room shift. Paige had spoken about soldiers alive because of her work, but she hadn't spoken about what she lost, what she carried home. The message on her phone had touched something that the hospital hadn't seen yet. Vance's voice softened. If you stay here, you won't be alone. Paige's eyes held his, and for the first time, Chloe saw a crack in the armor. Not emotion spilling out, just the hint of fatigue behind the discipline. I spent 4 years learning that surgery isn't a solo act, Paige said quietly. It's a team. It has to be. You don't save lives by being the hero. You save lives by building people who can save lives without you. Chloe's throat tightened. She had watched enough good nurses burn out to know how rare that mindset was in a surgeon. Paige stood, not dramatically, just smoothly, as if decision was another instrument in her hand. "I'll accept your offer," she said. Vance's eyes widened slightly. "You will?" Paige raised one finger on 3 conditions. Evelyn's voice came from the doorway before Chloe could react. "Let me guess. You want the keys to the hospital?" They turned. Dr. Evelyn Vance stood there, arms folded, expression sharp, but there was a new caution in her eyes. She had been listening long enough to know this was not a negotiation. She could win with authority. Paige faced her calmly. "Not keys, tools." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted. "Conditions." Paige's first finger stayed raised. "I want to build a trauma training program based on combat medical protocols. Simulation drills, standardized responses. Not optional. Not once a year. Regular." Vance didn't blink. "Done." Evelyn's mouth tightened. "That costs money." Vance's head turned slightly toward her. "So do funerals." Paige raised a second finger. "I want to work directly with the emergency department to improve response times and surgical outcomes. We track it. We measure it. We fix the bottlenecks." Vance nodded again. "Done." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "You're asking for operational authority." Paige raised a third finger. "I want the authority to implement changes when they save lives, even if they challenge traditional protocols." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "That's a blank check." Paige's voice stayed quiet. "It's responsibility." Evelyn stepped into the room, stopping a few feet away. "You understand there are laws and regulations. You cannot simply rewrite policy because you feel like it." Paige met her gaze. "I'm not asking to break laws. I'm asking to stop hiding behind tradition. When tradition is killing time." Vance spoke before Evelyn could respond. "All 3 conditions accepted." Chloe blinked. "Miles." Vance looked at Evelyn. "Evelyn, we've been trying to fix these issues for years. We've written committees and memos and nothing changed. Tonight, she changed outcomes in real time. We can either learn from that, or we can keep doing what we've been doing and pretend it's enough." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She looked at Paige and something in her expression shifted from opposition to calculation. "If you stay," Evelyn said, "we will verify every part of your history. Privileges, background, all of it." Paige nodded once. "You should." Evelyn held her gaze. "And you will have to work within a system." Paige's voice stayed calm. "Then build a system worth working in. If you love this incredible story of medical heroism and strength under pressure, show your support by hitting like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with everyone." For a moment, the break room was silent, except for the hum of the vending machine. Outside, the hospital kept moving. Day shift staff were arriving, voices bright with the false energy of morning, unaware of how much had happened while they slept. Vance extended his hand, finally offering it. Paige looked at it for a beat, then shook it. Her grip was firm, steady, unshowy. "When can you start officially?" Vance asked. Paige's eyes flicked toward the board, toward the list of cases already stacking for the day. "I never stopped." Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Evelyn's lips pressed together. "We'll need to update your privileges and file. HR will handle it." Paige nodded. "And I'll need my gear shipped from storage." Shaw's eyebrow lifted. "Gear." Paige glanced at him briefly. "Things that make work faster and safer." Vance's eyes narrowed with interest. "What kind of things?" Paige's voice stayed even. "The kind of equipment combat hospitals use because they don't have time to argue." Evelyn looked like she wanted to push back. Then she caught herself. Tonight had already proven that time was the currency that mattered most in this building. A knock came at the door. A senior nurse stepped in, day shift badge. Still fresh, eyes wide with curiosity. "Dr. Sterling," she said, voice respectful. "Is it true?" About the night Donna watched Paige's face. There was no pride there, no hunger for recognition, just the quiet discipline of someone who did the work because the work was required. Paige nodded slightly. "The patients are stable." The nurse took a breath. "Would you teach?" Paige's gaze flicked to Vance, then to Evelyn, then back to the nurse. "Yes." The nurse's shoulders dropped, relief washing through her expression, as if that single word changed the future more than a contract ever could. Vance glanced at Chloe. Get the paperwork started. Chloe nodded and turned to go, then paused. Doctor looked at her. Chloe's voice was quiet. Do whatever it takes to keep her. Vance's eyes stayed on Paige as she picked up her charts and began walking toward the corridor, already scanning the morning schedule like a soldier scanning a perimeter. The question isn't whether we want to keep her, Vance said softly. It's whether we can build a place worthy of her. Evelyn heard him and didn't deny it. Paige stopped at the window overlooking the emergency department. Ambulances were pulling in. Stretchers rolled. Families moved through the doors with fear in their faces. The day shift was taking over, and the rhythm of Rivergate was resetting itself. Vance stepped beside her. Why us? He asked, quieter than he had any right to be after the night he'd had. Why Rivergate? Paige watched the ER team move. Nurses triaging with focus. Techs pushing equipment without being asked. Residents listening instead of posturing. Even in exhaustion, she had seen something here she hadn't expected. In Afghanistan, she said, we had a saying. Mission first, people always. Vance waited. Paige turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. Last night, your people put patients first. Not their ego, not their comfort. That matters. Vance swallowed the praise, hitting him harder than criticism would have. Paige's mouth tightened again into that almost smile. Besides, I have a feeling the cases here won't let me get bored. Vance let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if he still remembered how. Chloe watched them from the hallway, then turned and walked toward the nurses' station. She started making calls, training, equipment, privileges, meetings that might finally have purpose. Evelyn stood back, watching the hospital wake up and realizing she would have to do what she had always done. Only faster, only cleaner, with less tolerance for comfortable delay. It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. Paige picked up her charts again and headed toward the surgical wing footsteps. Steady. The night had made her a legend in a building that didn't believe in legends. Now the day would ask her to do the harder thing. To turn one extraordinary performance into a system that could carry it forward. And Rivergate, with its humming machines and tired staff and bright morning light, leaned into the work ahead, not knowing if it had hired a surgeon or invited a war into its walls, but understanding one thing with sudden clarity. Patients were coming and Paige Sterling was staying.